Very happy again to welcome Diane and Caroline for this very interesting conversation on the board and career development. So I leave it to you, Diane, to introduce your guest and have a nice conversation.
Thank you so much, Jeannie, for that great introduction. And thank you to the PWN for hosting this, this talk. This is an opportunity for Carolyn and I, who met at the PWN, not everybody knows that, many years ago. It's a chance for us to pay back to the network, to all the professionals out there, on all the things that we learned and we gained because we had so many benefits from being part of the network. So just to begin, just a bit of background. I'm an organizational psychologist, coach, and mentor, and I've had the chance, as we said, to meet Carolyn through the PWN, and she was so amazing and giving so many opportunities to work together while she was in different roles. But we'll talk about that during the entire conversation that we have. So I think it's really important for you for the group to know that Carolyn, and the reason we've invited her to speak, has a very important role as board member in a number of large organizations that you've probably been involved in or you might know about. One is Generali, the insurance company. Another is Moncler, the fashion company, and then Illy Caffè, but many more. So we are really honored to have you, Carolyn. Thank you so much for being with us. Perhaps you can give us an update in terms of your current work and maybe explain in a very simple and high-level way what it is that you do as a board member and your background as an auditor, internal auditor.
Thank you, Diane. Really a pleasure being with everybody today. I'm sorry we're not physically together and that I can't see all your faces, but really quite a pleasure. What can I say? I did, in fact, meet Diane in PWN. We are talking about the 80s, so we go back a bit. I came to—
Oh, I thought it was the 90s.
Well, I'll figure that out.
The beginning of the 90s. Sorry, just to be just a little bit chatty on it. No.
I came to Italy in the 80s with a firm which is now called KPMG, so one of the accounting firms. I had a great desire for one, languages, and two, international. I just had a huge desire for it. And so I had the fortune at that time to come over for an international transfer that then turned into a career and a lifetime in Italy. Have been there ever since. After a corporate career, which I will explain in some way during our conversation, in 2014, I started basically a new career, which is board positions. Now, these board positions basically took advantage of what was my main expertise, which was heading of internal audit, and I can explain that better, financial reporting, risk management, corporate governance. All these areas I had acquired a skill for in the corporate world. And in 2014, I left the corporate world to join Generali as the chair of the statutory board of auditors, and I'll explain that better as well. In Italian, it's called Collegio Sindacale, but also the board of Illy Caffè, of Alpha Bank in Greece, of Ferrero, not the board, but the audit committee, and now more recently, Moncler. To be truthful, the startup was with Autogrill, which was an amazing company, and with Ita Mobiliari, which is an investment company. And all this happened very quickly and very intensely because, one, it was the time that there was a need for women on boards, and there still is. And two, it was a time for change, just to capitalize on what was my corporate expertise, entering into this new type of work as a board and an audit committee chair. Now, just for your information, in Italy, which is very particular, and if we have any internationals outside of Italy, France or whatever, the statutory board of auditors is something typical of Italy. It takes on all the EU requirements of the audit committee, And the audit committee is a body that supervises everything around internal control, risk management, financial reporting, making sure that the independent auditor is good. And you, I'm sure, know about the many scandals of external auditors around companies that have gone bankrupt, like Enron. Wildcard was a more recent one. So supervising the external audit activity and so forth. And that's what the audit committee does. And it can either do it at a supervisory level called Collegio Sindacale, or within the board, which is another form of corporate governance. I do a bit of both. And it's a very interesting and extremely difficult job, because there's a lot of pressure in not making any errors in corporate governance that have led to, for example, the disasters that we have seen in things like Wirecard and
well, I think this speaks to, Carolyn, if I may, the fact that one of your greatest success points is your technical ability and how well skilled and experienced you are, and that's why you were asked to be on so many of these boards. So that's probably one of the main things. And certainly for those of you who are in Italy, you might look up a book that has been written that Carolyn has produced a number of years ago, which was published, but she might mention that later. But one area of success, certainly, and one that we're always promoting for women, is to the importance of their background in STEM, you know, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And I think I think we sort of take for granted, you and I, Carolyn, we are two foreigners in Europe, both American background. And I can say too, from my background, I would attribute some of the opportunities that I've had in my career here in Italy also due to a preparation as an organizational psychologist and sort of a specialist. So that is all well. And I think that the way that you've explained, it gives a great background. And so perhaps we could begin by saying, you know, when I came to Italy, and you and I both having had the opportunity to be in the PWA, at the time, I think we were forming the organization, just to give people an idea of, you know, how far back that goes. It was the early 90s. And I can say that having been a foreigner arriving from being abroad, I was working in Accenture. I had worked in Australia and in Singapore then, but I had never worked in a country that I did not speak the language. So PWA was such an amazing resource, PWN now, for professional reasons, for as a woman in you know, seeking a career, and the benefits that I had. So the first question for you, Carolyn, is exactly that. What did you believe that you got in terms of benefits as a professional and as a woman, as a foreigner, working in Italy from the PWN?
Well, there is nothing better than having people to speak with, to gain context in a foreign world. There's language issues, there's culture issues, there's work issues, there's everything. We love it for that, but it's challenging. So we hooked on, for example, immediately, Diane, and at that time, I think we're talking late 80s, early 90s, I had jumped the from one, basically the corporate position of auditing in KPMG to a corporate environment that was totally Italian. I mean, totally Italian. And we're talking about Montedison, which is now called Edison. And maybe some of you will recall a certain company called Ferruzzi, and you can look up also a certain Raul Gardini who had almost won the America's Cup. And it was a very, very important company, 80s, 90s, until they had a certain problem, which I'll tell you about that later, because that's one of the challenges that I dealt with in my life, in my career. But jumping into, as a manager, foreigner, yes, I was hired for taking care of the international stock exchanges upon which Montedism was listed, but I was dealing with a extremely Italian environment, and I brought Diane in. I brought you in. I brought you in to do some coaching of team building, leadership.
You were so far advanced. I mean, I remember you had your internal auditors, and Carolyn has a very visionary point of view as a leader. And her interest was in helping the internal auditors to have the hat of the internal consultants. I did later find out through the work that I did with other companies, they weren't also advanced about thinking of that gap in terms of competencies. If I'm an internal auditor, I'm seen as a controller, and therefore people don't want to talk to me. Whereas Carolyn had this very important emphasis on communication and collaboration, and therefore the idea of an internal consultant. And so we were working on this transition, and also with her as in her leadership of the group. So it was a fascinating project and a great opportunity.
It was amazing because I came to realize that I was not the person I thought I was.
She was raising her self-awareness.
I thought I was a great manager, technically capable, had this nice team of people. We were a team until Diane came along and made me realize that my perception of the people was a little different from their perception. And that was a game changer. And so she brought some insight in that. One, changed my whole style of leadership, and two, brought me to respect you in your work as a mentor for this type of leadership skills. And I'll
thank you, Carolyn. So that whole start with PWN and getting ready. And I wanted to mention to the group, if you have questions that pop into your mind, you can stick them in the chat. And at the end, we're going to allow for 15 or 10 minutes. And Jeannie's going to help us with culling through and editing those questions so that we can hear your questions, so to make it interactive with you. So please feel free to do that. So moving on along here, such an interesting conversation. In terms
but you're not going to tell everybody what my perception was and what their perception was, Diane?
Sure, go ahead, go for it.
Well, it's worth a mention. I had the perception that I was a good boss, and I liked team building and so forth, and used my authority. And instead, they found me a little bit, is the right word, a touch on the autocratic side. In other words, giving
autocratic,
orders.
Authoritarian, maybe
Authoritarian, that's it. And I was totally shocked. So I had to bring out my authoritativeness and pull back my authoritarian style. And so I changed immensely from that. And I thank you. You're my man.
Yes, I can say that she did do a fantastic job. And I think you brought those learnings to your other opportunities when you worked at Poste Italiani and other places where we had a chance to also do some work. But as far as the turning points in your career, because your career has been very rich, and I think a lot of our audience members can really learn from the pivot points, the decisions and turning points that you made. What turning points did you have? Why do you consider them turning points? And what issues did you have to address or manage or navigate when you came to those turning points in your career?
It's a big question, Diane. I have to say that turning points is every time you change your job, your company is a turning point, because you have to adapt to a new environment. You're the same person, but you're in a totally different context. So there's an immense amount of adaptation to a new environment. So imagine going from an auditing firm that's international, that serves on a consulting type basis, into a totally Italian organization that wants to be international, but is still extremely Italian. And you're adapting to a totally new environment. I had challenges, okay, in my career. After KPMG, which at that time was called Pete Marek, one, the turning point was that it took courage to leave that job. It was my first change in Italy. I was a bit naive, to be truthful. I probably should have looked better exactly at what I was getting, because I did a one-year job in a finance company that actually did not turn out well. And fortunately, because of my expertise, Montedison took me on because they had a lot of international needs at that time. So there's nothing better than being hired and needed for your international competencies. And that's exactly what happened. However, 12 years in Montedison had incredible challenges in it, because you can all look in the web. I mentioned to you Ferruzzi, I mentioned to you Gardini. There was a huge scandal. 1993, at that time I was in charge of financial reporting, and I did not know that behind the screens there was an enormous fraud. And the day of the shareholders meeting, they announced we're in lira now, 435 billion lira of loss in financial statements that I had produced because of a major fraud that was behind the scenes, and that was obviously subsequently investigated. And I won't retell all the story, but it was.
I remember you had those
terrible
terrible times. You had to go back and forth from Milan to
yes, and this is where I have to say my integrity, because basically I am a person of integrity, and I was recognized for that. They never blamed me. I said everything that I knew of the situation. And so then management changed. And this is where I was introduced, and I was invited to head up what is called internal audit in Montedison. So out of financial reporting into internal audit, change in career, total change in career. So that's a challenge as well. Internal audit is today for listed companies is extremely important. It's required by all listed companies. It's a function that oversees processes for controls and so forth. You know, the famous question, where were the auditors when something goes wrong? It's something that is supposed to ensure proper internal organization and governance by looking at processes and so forth. Montedison practically didn't have it, so I practically had to create it. That's a challenge. Creating something in a company that's not used to it is a challenge.
For
but
sure.
It was very successful, and that's where, in fact, we had our occasions to develop the leadership. I have to say that in my career, and this is a message I would like to bring to all the people who are listening, I was very, very active in the association that is guiding internal audit. In Italy, it's called Associazione Italiana Internal Auditors. Abroad and worldwide, it's called Institute of Internal Auditors. And I became basically a leader in this voluntary environment of association. In fact, I was president of the association for 8 years in Italy, president of the European one for 2 years in Brussels, and then later vice president in Miami for the global center. This was a parallel to my career that was extremely important. I learned communication skills. It came natural to try to change things, because I have to tell everybody that the internal audit profession has a terrible reputation. So there was a question of revamping what was seen as an old style profession and making it modern, as Diane was mentioning. So that was a challenge, but it was fantastic. So if you have a bit of passion in something you want to see change, well, dive into it. That's what I did, and I reaped the benefits later.
What would you say were the benefits from that? Was it more the networking or the opportunities to challenge yourself and to bring forward the organization, or exactly? Because I also can say that as a foreigner, my approach also has been to volunteer for organizations like the PWN and other professional associations that I've been in, because I found that by showing my abilities, and creating a network and being recognized for my competencies, that actually always branched into new opportunities for my career. So what was it exactly for you?
Well, the truth of the matter is that because of the leadership role that I took and the communication, call it communication ability, because there was a certain ability in speech making, in planning events and so forth. I became a well-known figure, and this did help me significantly in obtaining a change in career and obtaining the board positions that I have today because of a reputation. Now, okay, I wrote a book in internal audit. I wrote a book in risk management. Am I a total expert in these areas? I'm an expert, but I'm not a total expert. You might find another person who's more expert, but the communication of that, of the various aspects behind that is everything. It's everything.
Absolutely. I think another thing you've just communicated is that some people think that if they're not an expert, they can't write a book. But what you're helping the group to understand in terms of your growth mindset, because you definitely have one, is, and I think most men would normally say, well, why do I have to be an expert on it? We write the book. And so I think you take on that same sort of growth mindset, which is, I have a lot of expertise and couldn't write the book, and therefore you did. You didn't have that self-limiting belief, which some people say, I'm not the expert.
Sure,
there's never only one, but anyway.
There's also another side to it, is that, well, you have to see when there's a gap of knowledge in any area, and there is a gap of knowledge. And so we wanted to fill that knowledge a bit, especially in Italy. I mean, there's a lot of progress to be made in that area. But I did want to tell you of because the story is quite interesting. Moncler is, all things have an end to a normal path. And at a certain point, I had done everything I could in Moncler, and it was time to change. And this is when I had the idea of going entrepreneurial in a certain sense. Entrepreneurial meaning going back to KPMG, but in a totally different capacity. I proposed to set up a new practice that was centered around corporate governance, internal audit, risk management, internal control. And in the 90s, that was a very, very hot topic. These listed companies really needed it. And wow, once again, communication skills are very important. You can't be a consultant, and a challenge is going back into the consulting world without being a communicator. You're speaking with clients at that point. You're no longer a manager in a company. So that was quite amazing. That was an amazing experience. It was amazingly successful. It was amazingly brief, and I'll tell you why. But people are still talking about it today, how KPMG set up their corporate governance, internal audit, risk management practice. They're still talking about it today. Now, why is that? Because if you can see where there's a gap and fill the need and communicate, well, it works very well. Now, the reason that was not a long experience was because I received an invitation that I could not refuse. And life is made of opportunities. You receive opportunities, you have to decide upon them, and if they're good, you should go for them. And it takes a lot of courage. And I received an invitation from Corrado Passera, who was the head of Poste Italiane, who had just done an immense turnaround. So we're just like you revamp internal audit. Well, he revamped the entire postal system. And he had some last efforts, some last objectives to achieve. And one of those was to convert what is an inspector unit of 1,000 people, 1,000 inspectors, into a modern internal audit company function. And that's why he hired me, which meant coming down to Rome. I had a very small child at that time, so that was also an opportunity and a challenge. And it was just an amazing experience, because here's this American woman coming into this old style postal system, where the most important thing, and we're not taking minutes here, is keeping your job until you retire. and okay,
The attitude, you mean, of the
yes.
Postal Service people. Yes.
At that time, absolutely.
But Pasaras made so many innovations, and you were one of those.
He did an amazing job. And so I find myself, from a consulting capacity to once again, a manager in charge, 800 people, which we then streamlined down to about 500. We're talking about a geographic network of persons, setting up a new system, a new way of working. And there again, I go back to the theme of communication. It was everything, and they treated me with immense respect, and that was a 12-year path that is pretty unforgettable. I never thought much about myself being as a woman. I never felt so much about myself being a foreigner, though I have to admit that while it's easy when you're in international context, that was not an international context, but they needed me for my skills, for my communication. So it worked out very, 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 very well. If I was going to give advice to people, I would tend to say, seek out where you can fit into an international context. However, occasionally opportunities arise. That is not the main point of focus. And when you can make a change, when you're a change maker, you can really earn quite a reputation for it. So challenge and and achievements. And there, on a parallel, once again, I was working as the president of the Association for Internal Auditors. So it was there was a great amount of synergy and getting people active in that.
And you also went to the European level with them, and I think you were asked to do something at the global level for the Internal Audit Association as well, right?
That's correct. Yes, the natural path was to go. I didn't move to Brussels, but it was in Brussels, the European side of internal auditors, and then also the IIA worldwide, which was a wonderful experience. And that's where one realizes there were surveys about this profession, and so you can each one of you who are listening think about your own profession. How is your profession perceived? Is your profession perceived as it is, or is it a wrong perception? Well, guess what? In my profession, they perceived it as inadequate, ineffective, and a lot of people who got put into that position because they didn't have a position elsewhere. Whereas instead, it's a managerial position that is moving to change organizations and improve them. So
would you say that was a quality for Italy or for worldwide, people being put into
worldwide,
audit?
Worldwide, but it has changed like this because of the people's competencies building. And that's all around communication. That's all around not being authoritarian. That's all around thinking about what the other person is thinking. I call it empathy, if that's the right word. So sure. Challenge and opportunity was acquiring a great skill for empathy and understanding what the other person had in his head or her head to reach agreement, because internal auditing is all about saying what's not working and how to change it and how to improve it. And every job is like that. I mean, what job is not there where you have to change something?
Maybe you can help the group to better understand, Carolyn, when you transitioned for a turning point from going from that position in the postal system for managing the internal audit, when you started to get on boards, what did it take when you were networking, whether you were involved or had contact with headhunters or, important individuals that were looking for those positions to fill? What tips would you give to our audience in terms of that transition point and what it took for you?
So executive search firms are very important when it comes to boards, because they are the people behind corporations who are assisting in gaining new board members. And new board members is a constant. There's a constant rollover. There's a maximum term that one can have. There's a need for women on those boards. And now back in 2014, there was the push of legislation. We need to get to 30% to 33% of women. And okay, fine. That actually was part of my timing. But again, they grab you, they know you if you're involved in things that go above and beyond your corporate or your job environment. So again, the association, any sort of association where you can become a leader is very, very helpful. Having said that, I think that executive search firms are important. It was all a little bit natural for me because of the leadership position that I was holding. So people came more to me than I went to executive search firms. But as time goes forward, it's a two-way street, absolutely. And you just simply have to make yourself known with an excellent CV.
Obviously, yes, well, the excellent CV, your great exposure through the associations, your ability to communicate, all of those things that helped you to get visibility and therefore made you more appealing to be invited to be on those boards. And then, of course, your efficacy or efficiency and effectiveness on those boards as you were doing that, because you've been doing this, the board area for at least 12 years, correct?
Since 2013, approximately. So
okay, yeah, okay, so a little bit less. So about 10 years.
Well, anyway, folks, if you're thinking about board work, or if you're already involved in board work, let me tell you, there's a lot to learn, because I had my collisions as I had my great success. There again, the challenge is change in environment. There you're working in a very closed situation, a board with a strong CEO, always a very strong CEO, and you can talk a lot, or you can talk a little, or you can talk just right. So your communication skills that you thought you had have to change, have to be modified, have to adapt to the situation once again.
Constantly, it's a constant thing.
And it's a great exercise in learning to adapt, speaking out when it's appropriate. And if you're able to do that, you get credibility. If you're able to do that, they come to you. In boards, there are committees. Committees are the most important things in the governance of boards. It's not really the board, it's more the committee. So there's the audit committee, which is my main area. There's a nomination committee, there's a remuneration committee, there's a sustainability committee, and so forth. Each one of these committees, you have the opportunity to come out. Now, ESG, for example, is a very big topic. Sustainability committees are becoming very important. So if you can bring expertise, I was asked, for example, this board that I'm on in Greece, Alpha Bank, they asked me out of the blue to monitor the ESG development. Well, guess what? I was not an expert on ESG. Today I could write a book, but I was not an expert. I had to study it. And then I started speaking out when the moment was right, and I drove change, and that's happening now. I think that we're all aware that every company is ahead or behind. Everybody has their timing in reaching the objectives of climate change, ESG, sustainability. So flexibility is, I guess, the word that's coming out. Adaptability.
Yes, adaptability. I think your level of learning agility is very high, and your ability and our courage, as you say, to get into new topics and to take them on, to self-teach and to prepare yourself to then show. This is one of your success factors as well. So, I mean, we've got a number of them coming out now. So just to a quick review would be the issues related to your courage, your ability to communicate, looking for gaps, finding needs and filling those needs, communicating those, learning to adapt, speaking up. These are all things that you've mentioned so far, but I think overall they all speak to your learning agility, which I think many of us who work in the field of coaching, we know how important, it is to that mental agility, the people agility, the change and results agility, and self-awareness. We all know that these are areas that are fundamental, and you were not afraid, even in that very first project that we did together, to address raising your self-awareness. And I think as a leader, that made all the difference. And then taking on the feedback that you received from the team as to, make those changes. So all of these things have led to your success in your career. And I commend you on all of these changes that you've been able to address. I remember distinctly when you had to make that pivotal point or that decision if you were going to go to Rome to work with the postal system and addressing the issue, because you did have a small son at that time, thinking this could be a good opportunity to get out of what was maybe a riskier entrepreneurial role in what you had convinced KPMG to do, and your ability then to make that decision. So maybe you could share with the group a bit about your challenges, about raising your son, about work-life balance, which we all are interested always, how you manage that, what went well, you think in doing that in your career, the work-life balance and raising your child. And if you were to change something, what would you change and why?
Oh, Diane, that's a tough one.
I give these really hard questions.
Yes, being partner in charge of a new practice with a 3-year-old was quite something, and it was hard. The only thing I would change, and I'll tell you about the shift to the from KPMG to the corporate world, is perhaps, and I don't know how many of you in front of me are mothers, especially mothers of just one child is even another story. But the first several months of birth, I kind of thought it was a given that, oh, they're with the tata, they're with the babysitter, fine. But actually the first several months are, I think, quite critical. So if I did anything differently, I probably would have liked to have spent a little bit more time in the first few months. Having said that, I have absolutely no regrets in following my career. I am pleased with the fact that I decided to leave the position of partner in a consulting firm to go to Poste Italiane, because I had the fortune of equal stimulation, totally, but at the same time, I reduced immensely my travel. Whoever is a mother, the travel is an additional component. Now, we've just been through COVID. Smart working is fantastic for many and can reduce that travel issue as well. So I can only say that in those early years of my child, his name is Max, a real comedian, he understood the passion that I had for what was going on then, so creating the Association of Internal Auditors, because I was doing a turnaround of this association. The events, I would bring him to the events. He would crawl under the table at the events. People would know him. So he was a bit part of it. Now, obviously, you have to choose when you can do that and when you can't. But if a child shares the passion or feels the passion, it helps a lot. They understand. And it's an added feature, let's say, to the relationship. Having said that, I divided my attention. I think that attention to a child is so very important. So I divided my attention. I had the fortune of having a large management network under me, because obviously you have a group of 500 people, you have a strong management under you. And so you work it to the best of your ability. You work it to the best of your ability. But again, the change, if I had not received the offer in Poste Italiane, I would have continued with KPMG. The passion still would have been there. It would have been harder on me. But I think if the child is able to understand what you're doing and be involved in it, that's sort of a key in success.
So you found sharing that passion with Max was an opportunity for your relationship, and you were able to make it to work, and you found those moments that to give attention and to spend with him. And I know that you did a lot of that. And
you coached me for so many things. He coached me on my speaking, and I coached him on his speaking. We would do joint speaking engagements.
Which
presentation skills.
Okay, so which aspect of the speaking, with the Italian and English, or what do you mean by that?
Oh, presentation skills. I mean,
okay.
He's getting up and speaking to somebody, and that's a skill that everybody must
Absolutely.
work on.
Yes, it's something that we're constantly working on with clients, so I can appreciate that. I haven't seen any questions coming into the chat, but please feel free to pop those into the chat, and Jeannie will help us to monitor those towards the end. I think we've covered a lot of different topics, and it would be really interesting to hear your view. We've kind of talked a little bit about this already, but your view about your own personal characteristics that you believe you have, that which have helped you in your career, your personal characteristics.
Well, we have touched upon the issue of communication, but I did want to make more of an emphasis on that word empathy. Whenever I'm speaking with someone, and I try to pass this on also to my family members, my son, you always have to think what is in their mind. And many people don't do that. If you think about what is on their mind, you think what they're thinking, it will go a long way. It takes a lot of adaptability. That's one. Empathy. So thinking in their perspective.
Yeah, from their point of view.
I would like to mention, as a woman manager and so forth, part of my communication is also in dress. I am a professional. I seek professional dress. This is me, everybody's different, but I have read some books also on this.
Well, I worked with
not an excessive amount of jewelry, not an excessively high heel. Okay, I might be touching difficult terrain here, but
well, when I worked with Accenture, I remember we read the book Dress for Success. That was what they were giving all of us, so that we would dress in a certain way, because you never want to attract too much attention or distract.
Now, there are, however, in Italy, and Italian women are fantastic, and their style is fantastic. They may not agree with this, but it is something to think about. It is something to think about when you're trying to progress in a man's world, is just reasonable dress. They're wearing a tie and a jacket, and I myself wear a suit and lowish heels. And also, if I may say, the smile goes a long way. I'm not always a extremely nice person. Occasionally a manager has to be strong and serious, but smiles go a long way in communication. I think we have a question.
Well, we do, but we'll address this towards the end. So we're going to collect the questions. So you were saying about smiling, address, empathy, other characteristics that you
Well,
feel personally that you have that have made an impact on your success?
when it comes to a foreigner in a foreign country, language is an issue. Okay, I was married to an Italian for a few years, and it helped my Italian a lot. You really have to work on your language skills. I still have an accent. I'll always have an accent, but I don't have a bad accent. In fact, they like my accent. But many people do not acquire that language skill as much as they should, and it's not to be underestimated. So working on the language. Well, I don't know if this is related to my American origin or what. I would say more no than yes, but being practical. I mentioned integrity. Integrity goes a long way because people recognize you for that. And I guess one of my personal characteristics, because of the challenges that I had, persistence and resistance is important, because you will come across times where you're going upstream.
Right. Persistence, like tenacity. But when you say resistance, what do you mean?
Similar.
Okay.
Resisting the pressure and persistence.
Working under pressure. Yes, absolutely. I see you really, amazingly managing very stressful situations. So yeah, I would say for sure that is one of your qualities. Great. So in terms of doubts, or and how you might have managed those doubts during their career, if you had any at all, did you want to share with the group anything about that?
Diane, I can't say I had particular doubts. I just go forward. The only doubt was after 12 years in Moncler, I saw that I was doubting on what else I could do to achieve something. And so it was time to change. That's about it. Yeah, doubt is not really a term that
Okay, exactly. In fact, I've been talking with Carolyn for months about this interview that we talked about, that we're doing now. And it was always like, well, what am I going to tell them? Just do it. That's her attitude. And I can completely understand and relate. So, uncovering all these things, but I think I would add on the things that have come up already, which were your ability to communicate, your courage, your adaptability, this learning agility that you have.
It's a great term, learning agility. You made me realize it's speaking with you because I
raising your self-awareness.
Yeah, I had never really thought about it that way, but I guess it comes out.
So we've covered most of the questions that we had, and in general advice that you had. And I see that there is a question in the chat box, and it's only one question. Is that right, Jeannie? There's a couple other questions coming
up. We have a couple coming up. Maybe we can start with the first one. Maria is asking, how did you juggle your career advancement with your family commitments, apart with those with your son?
So that means like your family back in the US and maybe other family members and things like that, I think, if I understand well.
Well, I got a divorce.
You had good reason for that.
Yes. Well, you see, how do you work with the rest of the family? Yes, without a doubt, if you're a foreigner in a foreign country, your family is far away. And your parents are very important to you, and there comes a time when they need you. There comes a time when you need to change their circumstances because of their mental health circumstances. There were lots of challenges, and so there was a lot of back and forth. I had to shift my mother into a home, and yes, big challenges. Those are big challenges. And as you say, you do what you got to do. Obviously, you have people in your home country that also help out a bit, but it takes an immense amount of concentration. And And of course, you know, your partner is an important part of your life, and the relationship is all based on understanding and respecting. My partner is a conductor, totally different field. He totally respected my business side, and I totally respected his passion for music and his work. But it's all a question of respect on this side.
Okay.
And of course, you know, once again, trying to involve people. If you have to go away, you seek ways of making it into an event together, a family event, and welcoming them into your travels or your events and so forth.
Exactly. Okay, great. So that was question 1 from the group. And then there's the other question.
Yeah, we have another question related to the responsibility that comes with such a role. So Pamela is asking, I've always been concerned about having a place on the board, and if something untoward is going on in the background without my knowledge. How did you manage this?
If something
unpleasant is
something unpleasant is going on
in the background.
Yeah, the whole fraud situation with Gardini and so
I spoke about Montes and Ferrucci, Gardini. How did you manage this? Learning experience. You know, something was going on. Something was going on, and I guess that's when you become aware that corporate culture is so important, and you've got to feel it out. And if you, okay, on a board is one thing, and yes, board members have liability. There's no doubt about that. You have to suss it out. If you're seeing problems in culture, or you're sniffing something that doesn't smell right, you have to seek to the greatest extent of your ability to understand more. And if it continues that way, then you should probably back off. And there are boards that has taken place, boards, companies, etc. For example, the first job I jumped into that I didn't talk about in particular, after KPMG, the very first years, had that smell to it. It was not right. And sure enough, the gentleman who was running that company had legal problems later. I got out within a year. Yes, just don't ignore it. Take all signs in. It is important.
And how do you, when you take those signs in and then raising the issues, when the people that are running the organization are the ones who are, you know, inappropriately managing things, where do you go? How do you?
Well, we're talking about extreme situations here, folks. Nothing that I would say is the norm.
We saw them several times, so.
Yes. You know, there's something that is called whistleblower. I imagine that many of you have heard of that. That's a very, very good mechanism, and it's in place in all companies, and it's generally run well through anonymous mechanisms. So that would be the way to deal with it. That was not in existence when I was going through those challenges. So whistleblower, and it's published on the site how to do it. That's the way to go.
Exactly. No, I remember on
Just
another
for your information, it's the audit committee that investigates those things. So in a corporate world, whoever's in the corporate world, internal audit is on the top side, totally independent, reports to the president, and the board has the audit committee that is totally independent, all independent directors. If there's not an independent director, if there's a non-independent director in that committee, then that in itself is wrong governance, and you can start moving towards the door.
Absolutely. Well, it's been an incredible journey your career and sharing it. And thank you so much, Carolyn, for that. Thank you for the
Thank you,
PWN for
folks.
hosting us.
It was really a pleasure sharing this with you, and it was an eye-opener for me also to just exchange these. And you have once again, you, my mentor, have once again taught me new ideas and new terms that help me along in life. Never too late. Thank you.